to Good evening, everyone, and welcome to St. James Presbyterian Church's Bible study. Here we are at the corner of 141st Street and St. Nicholas Avenue in the village of Harlem in the city of New York. And we are grateful that you are joining us for our lectionary Bible study for the reading for this Sunday, June 16th, which is Father's Day. So happy Father's Day to everyone who looks at this on YouTube and everywhere else, and everyone here. Happy Father's Day. And we are going to get right into it. And we call the opening psalm of our day as our prayer to guide us into our worship. And we are going to be reading Psalm 20. Psalm 20, which is this incredible prayer for the king's victory. It's a communal petition for the king's victory. Most of our psalms are, they sort of typify them between being a communal psalm, or if there's a psalm that's being written just by one person for one specific priest, or even if it's just David writing. But this is for everyone to have a petition for the king to be victorious. Psalm 21, the next one, seems to be a thanksgiving for the very victory described in this psalm. Verses 1 through 5 prays that the king will be victorious in battle, and verses 6 through 9 gives assurance that he will be successful. So let us hear this psalm. The Lord answer you in the day of trouble. The name of God, the God of Jacob, protect you. May he send you help from the sanctuary and give you support from Zion. May he remember all your offerings and regard with favor your burnt offerings. May he grant your heart's desires and fulfill all your plans. May we shout for joy over your victory, and in the name of our God, set up our banners. May the Lord fulfill all your petitions. Now I know that the Lord will help his anointed. He will answer him from his holy heaven with mighty victories by his right hand. Some take pride in chariots, and some in horses. But our pride is in the name of the Lord our God. They will collapse and fall, but we shall rise and stand upright. Give victory to the King, O Lord. Answer us when we call. This phrase, the Lord answer, serves as a petition in verse 1, an assurance in verse 6, and a petition again in verse 9. So it's the same phrase, the Lord answer, the Lord does answer, and the Lord answer us again as a petition. This day of trouble is a phrase that is used to talk about a military crisis requiring the king to act as a military commander. If you remember last week in our Samuel text, God told he told Samuel to tell the people of Israel what would happen if they got a king, that the king wouldn't really be leading them into battle. But here is this protocol that when you say we are in a day of trouble, the military crisis, it requires the king to act as a military commander, very often sitting in the palace. May he remember all your offerings and sacrifices. The offerings and sacrifices here, of course, are regarded as a plea for divine favor. And then there's that switch in Selah where I usually take the break, where it's usually, sometimes we think that it was a musical shift in that. The other notes that we have, verse 6, now I know, a phrase that expresses great confidence. That's one of the things I'm going to start using in my prayers. Now we know that the Lord will. It may reflect a positive oracle also that the king has received. Here in this statement that is made by the person doing the commentary from the annotated Oxford New Revised Standard Version of the Bible is sort of speaking to the larger history of Israel and the people around them who are still, even though they have these priests and everything else, are turning to oracles to give them good or bad news. And this verse, I love this verse. It means that victory lies with God rather than with military technology. Some will say we like chariots and some in horses, but victory actually is in the hand of God. I love that.
Pull the green one down.
I love that phrase. And then we get back to this petition again. Give victory to the King, O Lord. answer us when we call. And this whole, so here we are. This is our psalm. So what are your thoughts on our opening psalm, people? Oh, people.
I didn't know that Day of Trouble was a military reference.
Yeah, that surprised me when I read that today. Day of Trouble. And so now I'm going to be looking for that all over the place. You were with us in the day of trouble, or be with us in the day of trouble, to see exactly, because I'm sure if it's being mentioned that it's a military phrase, talking about military crisis, that it must be mentioned several times. And when I read some of these texts, as we move forward in the Psalms and we move forward in the history of Israel, it's so interesting that this phrase, may he remember all your offerings and regard with favor your burnt sacrifices. This pleasing of God by sacrifices in order to get what you want is sort of different from how things started out. It's much more in keeping with what is happening with the other tribes and other people around them, Samaria, Mesopotamia, all those African Edenic tribes that are going around. When they pray to gods and they sacrifice to gods, it is in exchange for victory. So it's really interesting for me to read here that they're sort of doing the same thing. They're sort of implying the same thing, that they want God to remember that. Remember, we did this for you, so you do this for us. And now I know.
Transactional.
Yeah.
And I really like the phrase, some take pride in chariots and some in horses. My goodness.
Right?
You can call it other things, but we know what they mean by chariots and horses.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it says a lot.
I thought that was a particularly poetic notion here.
Armies and soldiers. I mean, we can put all kinds of words in there.
They will collapse and fall, but
Yes.
we shall rise up straight. That's a lot of hope right there.
Yep.
I have to remember this song. And give us victory, give us victory. So that is our song for the day, if that's all the comments that we have. Because we got some juicy stuff to dig into, right? We actually have this calling of David, or the picking out of David as the next king of Israel. We started out last week with the next king of Israel, the first king being chosen, the first being them saying that they wanted a king. And of course, the first king was who? It was Solomon, right?
Yes.
No.
And he built the temple. No, was it? No.
Saul. Was it Saul?
It was Saul.
Saul.
It was Saul. And here in this particular area,
Saul or Solomon? I heard Saul.
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 Saul. Yeah, Solomon comes after David because he actually builds the temple.
Right.
And here's the thing about this. When we think about these kings of Israel that I wanted to point out here, especially because Saul being the first king, God gets angry with him, and God doesn't want him to be king anymore. One second. So God doesn't want him to be king anymore, and he's upset with him for all the stuff that has happened between the chapters that we read last week and this week. That a lot of that has to do with these wars and fighting for one another, and the way that Saul has just become so done everything that God said that a king would do, and God is just like, no, I'm sort of done with that. But here we are in the calling and the picking of the next king. It doesn't mean that Saul automatically goes away. And that's one thing that I want to be very clear about, because it can get confusing if you just read it very quickly. What we're going to be reading, it makes it seem in a little way that like he just sort of disappeared and like the priest never saw him again. But no, he was still ruling until David actually ascended to the throne. So we're going to be reading from 1 Samuel 15, chapter 34 through chapter 16, verse 13. Then Samuel went to Ramah, and Saul went up to his house in Gibeah of Saul. Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death. But Samuel grieved over Saul, and the Lord was sorry that he made Saul king over Israel. The Lord said to Samuel, "Well, how long will you grieve over Saul? I have rejected him from being king over Israel. Now fill your horn with oil and set out. I will send you to Jesse the Bethlehemite, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons." Samuel said, "How can I go? For if Saul hears it, he will kill me." And the Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what you shall do. And you shall anoint for me the one whom I name to you." Samuel did as the Lord commanded and came to Bethlehem. The elders of the city came to meet him trembling and said, "Do you come peaceably?" He said, "Peaceably. I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves and come with me to the sacrifice." And he sanctified Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. When they came, he looked on Eliab and thought, "Surely the Lord's anointed is now before the Lord." But the Lord said to Samuel, "Do not look on his appearance or on the height of his stature, because I have rejected him. For the Lord does not see as mortals see. They look on the outward appearance, but the Lord looks on his heart." Then Jesse called Abinadab and made him pass before Samuel. He said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Then Jesse made Shammah pass by, and he said, "Neither has the Lord chosen this one." Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, and Samuel said to Jesse, "The Lord has not chosen any of these." Samuel said to Jesse, "Are all your sons here?" And he said, "There remains yet the youngest, but he is keeping the sheep." And Samuel said to Jesse, "Oh, send and bring him, for we will not sit down until he comes here." He sent and brought him in. Now he was ruddy and had beautiful eyes and was handsome. The Lord said, "Rise and anoint him, for this is the one." Then Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers, and the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward. So Samuel grieved over Saul because this king, the first king that he had selected, God has now rejected. And God's like, enough is enough. We need to make a new plan. I've rejected him, so fill up this horn with oil. The horn with oil is the anointing horn used for the making of a new king. It's something that was established in the first making of the king, that when you make a king, you will use this anointing oil, this ram's horn, and you will fill it with oil, and you will anoint with that particular one. Oh, by the way, Samuel did not see Saul again until the day of his death. Anticipates chapter 28, but it's in tension with 19, 28 through 34, which I believe sort of gives them another meeting of sorts. But that does not matter for where we're at now. That's just so that you have that in your mind if you read ahead. We did the fill your horn with oil. And Jesse, one of the things I just noted here is that this language from God, for I have provided for myself a king among his sons. That struck me and jumped out at me. I'm going to highlight this for a minute. I'm going to make for myself a king, because it's in direct contradiction to the people saying we want a king, and God just saying, okay, I'll give you a king. I'll give you the kind of king that you deserve. But here God is saying, for I have provided for myself a king. This finally lets me understand where in the text this Davidic dynasty started, and where God said that they shall always be, the descendants of David, which is why it's important for Jesus, right, to be a descendant of David, because I have provided for myself a king. And that goes all throughout the lineage of the monarchy. Then we all know that Saul is out of control. Out of control. Well, how can I go if Saul hears of it? He's going to kill me, the chief priest. Take a heifer with you and tell the people you're going to sacrifice. Jesse seems to be among the elders or civic leaders of Bethlehem here. So he's got a little bit of clout, which is another interesting thing about him. But he tells everyone to come. And even those people are afraid of him because they're afraid of the ramifications of accepting the priest, because they think that the priest is coming on behalf of Saul to give them some bad news. So that's why they came to meet him trembling. So Saul is out of control. Sort of like when a dictator starts saying that they want to sort of disassemble all the legal entities and all of the court systems in a country where it's been established. But that's sort of something we can talk about later. He said, peaceably, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Sanctify yourselves, he says to all of the other people that he invites, to the elders of the city. And this sanctification means to make oneself holy in preparation for sacrifice by means of ritual washing and the avoidance of ritually unclean items and actions, such as contacts with corpses and sexual emissions. All of that stuff is verboten before you go to sanctify something. They also thought that they were afraid, and I go back a little bit with the trembling, perhaps they were afraid that he had also come to condemn them or for some wrongdoing. So they're just making sure that this suspicion is all taken care of, but this sanctification and this order to sanctify in the ritual way of cleansing is very, very, very much telling that, okay, we can sort of trust this. When he looked on Eliab, apparently Eliab was very tall and very good looking, but his looks were reminiscent of Saul, whom the Lord rejected as king. Because Samuel only has one piece of experience of anointing someone a king. So it must be this type. I love the fact that God goes against type and says that is not the one. I don't need someone to be tall. I don't need them to be this handsome person that looks like Saul. I don't need that. Because why? God is more impressed with the inner qualities of the heart. But Samuel does not know that. And you would think he would, since that's why God chose him. So he moves on throughout all the different brothers. When we studied this text before, we know that there is sort of like a plate that the priest wears. and it's the Urim and the Thummim. Urim and Thummim. And they have like these stones on them of different colors. And according to these stones on the Urim and Thummim, when they would cast them up to God and somehow they would lay them out for God, or for God to sort of give the divination. It was a divination tool. And so he must be using this Urim and Thummim to pick the king. And God's like, I'm picking the king. It's not up to this, it's not random. It's sort of also thinking that it's this actual way of God sort of choosing through divination that goes through the priest. But God is saying, I'm choosing myself. So you don't need to use this shield, this piece of 9 stones that you have across your chest. So this is also an interesting thing. Jesse made 7 of his sons pass before Samuel. This verse in 1712 credits Jesse with having 8 sons. First Chronicles 13:15 chronicles, writing down in a more historic fashion the history of Israel, mention only 7 sons. This text in 1 Corinthians 1:13-15 mentions only 7 sons because it's also building in now into this whole story, this power of David being especially blessed. The numerology is very big in the Hebrew faith, and this number 7 is perfection. It is like creation. It is God created in 7 days. So this number has all these different symbolisms of imagery and imagery of perfection and blessedness. So you would retell the story as you're writing your chronicles that he was the 7th son. But here we think that in Samuel, in 1 Samuel, many people think that part of the reason why he was named as the 8th son is to keep his origins humble. Wow. So with these humble origins, he becomes the 8th son. The youngest son could also mean the smallest son, because that word in Hebrew that we translate as youngest also means the smallest, which is important to note because that is also another contrast to Saul. Saul being big and tall and David being smaller, and because he's younger and smaller, which is why I guess when we see imagery and paintings of David, he always looks like a little boy. But he is keeping the sheep. I love this metaphor that no one gets when they're talking here in this tent. There remains the smallest, but he is keeping sheep. He is doing what a king is supposed to do, because that's a metaphor for the king. Mm-hmm. So he's already doing the actions. There's this beautiful play on these words. Oh, but he is keeping the sheep. That's the one who's going to be the king. Because this metaphor is fulfilled in the actions that he's doing in his very life. Send him, bring him. We will not sit down to eat of the roast until he sits down. And he had this reddish appearance, this ruddy appearance, reddish hair and reddish skin, reddish of hair and reddish of complexion. When you think about other reddish persons, you think about Esau, Jacob and Esau. Esau came out ruddy, with a ruddy complexion, which is why that made me, I'll just go off on a little aside, my Master's of Divinity writing, it wasn't a dissertation, it was a thesis, was basically, and once they came together, Esau and Jacob in comparison with Malcolm X and Martin Luther King.
Interesting.
Yeah, they both had the same mother, the church, because both of their fathers were pastors. And it all started because Malcolm X had a nickname of being called Red.
That's right.
And it made me think, wait a minute, Red, Esau, And he came, and Martin Luther King came afterwards, and Martin Luther King gets the legacy of being the one that, does the civil rights thing and blah, blah, blah. So it's like I was doing some comparison of that with that. But it was all because Malcolm X was called Red.
Yeah.
So he anointed him with this oil in presence of his brothers. And here is a small little thing that comes along again that I personally often forget. And that the Spirit of the Lord came mightily upon David from that day forward.
Mm-hmm.
God laid God's Spirit on David the moment he was chosen and anointed. Now, he won't become king for a while because there's still some shenanigans that go on with Saul, and Saul tries to kill him, and Saul is angry with him, and his son Jonathan takes the side of David over his father Saul and says, "You can be king instead of me." There's this spirit about David. And one of the ways he's brought before Saul is because he plays the lyre and he soothes him with this. This is where we get the tradition of David writing the songs and being able to sing the psalms, because he soothed Saul's craziness with his playing of the psalm, with the playing of the lyre. So here we have this notion of this king being chosen, this king that is chosen by God and not by the people, not by because you end up being the son of someone that was a king beforehand. This is completely and totally God's doing. For I have provided for myself a king. So we've heard the story of David most likely being, paraded before by his other brothers, and chosen last and coming out of the field. What did you hear new in this particular passage as we've heard it tonight and spoke of tonight? Or is there anything that you would like to sort of speak to from the text that we have read? Not written, read.
Mm-hmm.
Well, David was a shepherd.
Mm-hmm.
And what seems to stand out to me is that God chose him as a shepherd and knew that when they said he's tending the sheep, he's the shepherd. And God was looking for a shepherd, which goes all the way through the line to Jesus.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
And that is the role. When God explained last week what the king would be like for Israel, he did not mention anything about a shepherd.
No.
And yet all the other surrounding areas and all the other languages and all the other communities, this is the notion of a king, is to take care and to shepherd the people.
Right.
It's beautiful.
This during a time in which he said he Hunter were in a romantic relationship and had full for using drugs. Having Lowell argued his client.
Any other thoughts?
My thought is, can anything good come out of Bethlehem? And I think that the people there were in the outback,
Yeah.
away from the temple, away from the king, and they really were worried. What is this high priest coming to see us for?
It's trouble. We're in trouble.
It's trouble. We're in trouble.
We are in trouble. Something's going on here. Whew. And I don't even think that Jesse, because we know it from 2020 hindsight, right, Andrea, since you did this book club, we know that Jesse is related to Ruth.
Exactly.
So it's like this line of these people that are in this story. And the other thing about this is that I love the fact that the city of Bethlehem, it actually means the town of bread.
Mm.
So not only is there the idea that the shepherd is there, but the provision of the sustenance for people. Jesus said, I am the bread and I am the life. And Jesus was born where?
Yeah.
In Bethlehem.
Yep.
So this little town where nothing good can come from, it seems that, and if Saul knew that there was another king somewhere out in the outback, man, he probably would have done some Pharaoh stuff.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Town down.
Yep.
Wow. And I always wonder if once they poured the oil, if they used the horn as a shofar.
Oh.
I always wonder about that because it's the same type of horn.
So pour the oil out on the chosen one and
Mm-hmm.
it's a shofar.
And then unstop it and use it as a shofar. And that shofar, actually, the imagery of the shofar comes from the ram in the thicket with Abraham and Isaac. That's how the people of Israel, Jewish people, trace back the power of the voice of God, of being in the shofar as being the horn in the horn of the ram of the thicket, in the thicket. There's that connection with that. That's why these horns are so important when you see them and when you hear about them in these texts. It's not just because it was able to carry the oil, it's because it has very deep symbolic meaning for deliverance and how God calls God's people, and what God calls God's people to do.
All the way back to Abraham. All the way,
Like don't kill this kid.
yeah. For the children of Abraham
Yeah.
are as
Lab Show, they keep telling me, we got to get you a shofar.
well,
It's a lot of breath control.
yeah.
Every time there's a high holy day and people start trying to blow the shofar, they really have to start it like a couple of times before they get it right.
Practice it up in advance.
Yeah. And I saw an older rabbi and watched the people go to tears as he made his way up with his shofar that he had been blowing for years with his health condition of getting older. And he took this heavy, labored breath and blew into the shofar, and it was so piercing and so long as he's being held up by people on the stage. It was really emotional to see that. That's some power. Yeah, they're sanctifying themselves. Yeah, they can't touch corpses. So if someone died between the time of the heifer being slaughtered and being cooked up, then they couldn't touch the body or do anything with them. And they certainly couldn't deal with any sexual emissions. Sexual emissions were always thought of as being dirty and unclean. So there's that. There's that. So it's always weird when not weird, but it's like, it's right here in the text. We're always preoccupied with bodily things. So it makes sense when Paul is mixing up with the other philosophers of the time that this body thing is. We look at our bodies, we look at people's bodies and say, yeah, your body's beautiful, exercise, do this. Nah, it wasn't that. It looked good, but everything about it was sort of nasty. And it's interesting that Samuel doesn't know about the qualities that God is looking for.
I wonder how much time all of this took. Because it sounds like when he said, go sanctify yourselves and then join me for the sacrifice, basically, did they have to go back somewhere and sanctify
They had to
themselves?
go take a ritual bath. They had to go take a mikvah.
Okay, okay,
So they had to all go to a place where gathered water was still streaming, was flowing.
right, right,
Um, they had to clean themselves in that way.
right,
Yeah, yeah. And they had to go out and get David.
right, right.
Probably took 7 days. Let's stay with the
Mm-hmm,
number 7, right?
mm-hmm.
Yeah. Interesting stuff.
Just trying to imagine all of them going off to get sanctified. You know, like these little ducklings going
Yeah,
along.
yeah.
And then they get there. Well, what are you doing here? Oh, we're getting sanctified. Fine. Well, we can't tell you because we're afraid of what will happen to us. And then trundling on back, being sure not to touch anything they're not supposed to touch. That's quite a production.
It is. It is quite a production. And I think it comes from, and I see a lot of that in just in getting ready for high holy services. Um, the putting on of the shawl, the way that every time the shawl is put on, it's kissed, and you can't just put a shawl on. You have to swing it around the back. You have to hold it frontward and raise the front of it to God and wrap yourself in it so that it wraps around your body and goes over your head, and the front that you had out front is now facing to God on your head.
Wow.
So
It's
that's
almost,
what I've taken to praying much more, because it's really affected me in that way. When I wear a stole, I really do take time to sort of go off to the side with the stole and do my best to sort of take a moment with it and let it be what it needs to be on me, according to these purposes of being readying oneself to be with God. It's interesting stuff. Now, God likes this young, handsome guy, but he doesn't like the tall, handsome guy.
Mm-hmm.
short one.
But there's something in him. Of course, we know that God, this choosing of these sons also reminds me of Moses choosing a wife. None of the other daughters were really appropriate until it was the oldest one, and he married her. There's a lot of this going on, parading people before people and saying, pick one. Yeah. So this is the call.
Esther.
Go ahead.
I just said Esther was one.
This is a practice, yes. Practice.
Yeah, it was. And that was in the Persian Empire.
Mm. Still goes on.
Mm.
So here we are with David. We now have David chosen as king. We shall see where the lectionary scriptures take us moving forward with this. This reading in 2 Corinthians 5, 6 through 17, I don't have a lot of notes on it, but I will tell you this. There is a lot of cross-reference between Paul's other letters in here. There's a lot of cross-references of ideas and thoughts that went to the Romans that are all throughout here. And there's also some nod to some Hellenistic philosophers in this. Paul is really appealing to the nature of the mind of the Corinthians. One of the things we read about in the letters to the Corinthians is the people who followed the way in Corinth came from a mixed strata of society. But you can imagine once they sort of started getting, and Paul left, they started settling themselves up within the way according to their strata. And Paul is, when he speaks to them, he needs to speak in ways that people can understand all of the issues. And as I mentioned, this second letter of Paul's he's not happy with them at all. The first one, he wasn't happy, but he thought that everything got settled after he wrote those chapters. And then he gets another note that they're still acting out, and so he writes this other letter, which he's just not happy with at all. So he needs to have he does this logical conversation with them. He has some striking words for them, some spiritual words for them as well. This is a part of his continued letter from chapter 4, where he starts talking about ministry, momentary affliction, and the surpassing weight of glory.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we are always confident, even though we know that while we are at home in the body, we are away from the Lord. For we walk by faith, not by sight. Yes, we do have confidence, and we would rather be away from the body and at home with the Lord. So whether we are at home or away, we make it our aim to please him. For all of us must appear before the judgment seat of Christ, so that each may receive recompense for what has been done in the body, whether good or evil. Therefore, knowing the fear of the Lord, we try to persuade others, but we ourselves are well known to God. And I hope that we are also well known to your consciences. We are not commending ourselves to you again, but giving you an opportunity to boast about us, so that you may be able to answer those who boast in outward appearance and not in the heart. For we are beside ourselves. It is God. If we are in our right mind, it is for you. For the love of Christ urges on, because we are convinced that no one has died for all. Therefore, all have died. And he died for all, so that those who live might live no longer for themselves, but for him who died and was raised for them. This death being met with confidence is very much that death is met with confidence because the soul endures, or because all things are regulated by manifold order. And this is according to Hellenistic philosophers, Plato, Phaedo, his 63rd piece, and Epictetus, 63e, that was his writing. Epictetus, his Dissertationes 2:1-1-4. These are phrases that talk about the soul enduring, and that no matter what is going on with the body, that the soul will endure. This is more along those lines that I always keep talking about and bringing back to us, that the body itself traps the pure soul. This is the Hellenistic, philosophical, Roman way of understanding, and it gives people an opportunity, the Romans and the Greeks. You can excuse away the debauchery because that's the body doing it. But the soul is just waiting for the body to release it. So Paul is taking that notion and he's combining it with this whole thing about Christ dying for all, and that we need to live for Christ because we will all have to answer for what has been done in the body, whether good or evil. That's the through line. That is the shift. The Corinthians were going back to their practices of doing what was feeling good and what was right for them to do according to outside morals of the folks in their church. But Paul is trying to have them understand that you will have to answer for that. You won't go to, what is that? It's I forget the gardens. I remember from the movie Gladiator especially, because they gave me a great visual. The Elysian Fields.
No,
You know, you move on to the Elysian Fields and everything is all right. Paul is saying, yeah, that's nice, but there's nothing that you have to really be a part of or do to do that. And when you accept Christ and you know what Christ has done for you, you know that is an illusion. And we have to persuade others as much as we ourselves are known to God.
Reverend Derek,
Yeah.
what is when you say it's an illusion? What do you mean?
Well, the Elysian Fields, that whole thing about when people say, when they come to Christ and understand that Christ has died and conquered death and gone to prepare a place for us, it's like the Elysian Fields are no longer valid. They're an illusion.
No.
They don't count. They don't count as a viable thing for you. It's very interesting. But Paul he's brilliant with that in a way. And, I don't very often call Paul brilliant, but I do now with this. I do a lot more now when I realize how he's crafting these conversations. For if we are besides ourselves, apparently there's this spiritual ecstasy that is still going on in the early part of the first century with the followers of the way. Part of that, when you think about people dying in the stadium, and it says that people were singing hymns, and the Romans couldn't figure out what they were singing and why they were still so peaceful when they were about to be shredded apart by lions. This is the spiritual ecstasy that comes with being in the power of God and in the power of Christ. And he's saying, if we're beside ourselves, it's for God. We're not doing it for any other reason, and it's God that is moving us. But if we're talking from our right minds and explaining all of this, it's for you. So we don't want you to look at us and just think that, okay, I can be holy like that. I want you to understand what the tenets are of this. Nobody else has died for all. No one. So therefore, everybody else who died, who didn't believe in Christ, they just died. All have died. But he died for all. So if we don't live for ourselves, but for him who died and was raised for us,
Before Christ died,
well,
nobody was able to be saved.
well, he's talking more to the Gentiles than to anyone else. It's sort of saying the way that you think that you were going to be brought back, and there's still an argument between factions of Jews here in the first century about what actually happens when you die. But these people who are following Christ, because they're not yet Christians, these people who are following Christ, they come to an understanding that there is this life of the Spirit that goes on, and that you no longer die because you live for Christ. And as you live for Christ, you sort of become that your spirit inside of you can still gets purer and purer and purer, which is how I like to, I've been actually saying to people that they say, I've been asked a lot, what is Presbyterian? What is Presbyterian? What is Presbyterian? And this whole thing with grace. And I've taken to a couple of people of saying the access to God's grace is free and available to everyone. And when you access it, your spirit, your being sort of moves in a different way. So it's accepting the access to the grace that is free for us that changes us and makes us different. And when I was Baptist, I would say that's being saved. Because they say, I don't talk like I used to talk. I don't walk like I used to walk. You know, I don't do the same things. I don't hang out with the same people that I used to hang out with. This is the same thing. And I feel that once you have accessed that, and Paul is sort of intimating that, once you have accessed that knowledge that Christ has died for us and that this salvation is for you, and you fully hold on to it, you change. The Spirit changes you. The Holy Spirit changes you. And Paul is saying to the Corinthians who keep backsliding, you are changed and you will be noted in the judgment seat for changing back. So I urge you to know the fear of the Lord and persuade others to know this as well. Christ's love for us expressed in his one death and on behalf of us all. For the love of Christ urges us on. Your thoughts on some of this stuff, this deep stuff of Paul?
We're accessing it.
I once knew someone, Kathy and Frank, you knew this person too, but I'm still not going to name them, who read this text and was so moved that they couldn't decide whether they wanted to be away from the body or at home in the Lord. Not that they were suicidal, but in their spiritual way, they said, I love God so much, I don't know what I want more. And I was like, that's a deep response to this text. And I said, well, you should stay at home. We need you to please him here so that we can figure out ways that we can keep spreading this news to persuade others. And that person said to me, oh, yes, that's my intent. That's what I really think I need and believe that I should do.
Stick around.
Yeah.
We had a friend, and I think you met her at least once or twice, Derek, who the verses 6 through 10 were her like life verses. And she lived to be 88.
Wow.
Died of cancer. And as she aged and still kept being here.
Yeah.
Because she just was like, what the heck? Let's go. Get me. She turned toward more and more. She turned toward that last. So each may receive recompense for what is done in the body, whether good or evil. She began to develop a notion of behavior and consequence. That she was, when she died, she was trying to put together a study to prove that.
Wow.
Now, she was devout, lifelong Lutheran, law and gospel, that logical thing. My Reformed Presbyterian grace alone, we used to argue about this all the time.
Wow.
I'd say, you know what? The evil prosper, good people get punished. Maybe God said, I guess the compromise that we arrived at was she said, well, what about God set up the universe to have choices and consequences, but it doesn't always work like that because we broke the universe.
Oh.
Okay. Well, that's as close as we could come.
Wow.
To a compromise on just this first well, verses 6 through 10.
And we walk by faith and not by sight.
Yeah, seriously, yeah. She would read the newspapers and she would quote this text.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
There's another notion of how we are in our world and how we are in some of the religious traditions that have led us up to this point where we are right now. And it is you mentioned, Kathy, when you said logical, Reverend Kathy, it made me think about this. It is the pushing off of mystery and staying in the mystery of the faith, of those things that we do not understand. I try desperately always when I read these passages of Paul to logically piece them out and to logically figure out where to put the accents and so on and so forth. But there really is a lot of mystery just in that line.
Yeah.
We walk by faith and not by sight.
Right. Yeah.
It
Well,
takes a lot to embrace that.
yeah.
Implying that faith and sight are opposites.
Right.
Mhm.
Do my eyes deceive me? Yes.
Mm.
Derek, I remember your mom singing, "We'll understand it better by and by."
By and by.
Mhm.
You
I
know,
can
my brother and I still sing that song when we get together.
do you?
Oh yeah, yeah. Everywhere we go, we've been singing that. My brother and I have been singing that song in harmony since we were like, he was about 6, and that would have made me about 12 or 13. In the living room, not in church, in the living room at home.
Well, unless she was doing a solo, she would drop down and do the harmony.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Mhm.
If she were doing a solo, then of course she'd do the melody.
Yeah. Andre is the alto third.
I see. Of course.
Right, 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 right.
Mhm.
But that whole idea, we walk by faith. If we just take that and say we walk by faith, and those things that come in that faith walk are things that we cannot know what they will be. And it's as I came to the conclusion last year but we do know that they will be.
Right.
Like faith is this certainty of, oh, it will be there. Hope is, I hope I recognize it when it comes. So hope and faith work together, but faith is a little bit more certain than this questionable. And how we came to it last year in our year-long study of faith and hope, we really came to understand in our way of thinking that faith, being the substance of things hoped for and the evidence of things not seen, is like we do know that God has promised it. And we hope that we can stay faithful to what God has promised in that mystery. And walking by faith to actually be in movement by faith.
Mm.
To move forward by faith. And it's perfectly illustrated in that verse, in his eyes on the sparrow. Though by the path he leadeth, but one step I see.
Mm-hmm.
His eye is on the sparrow, so I know he watches over me.
Mhm.
We walk by faith,
Mhm.
not by sight.
Mhm.
Can you talk a little bit about 10?
I can try.
To me, it sounds almost like if you're going to receive recompense, whether good or evil, what has been done in the body, does that mean you could be turned out if you are judged not to have been what you should have been?
I can't speak for God, but I can say that you will be called out.
But not thrown out.
Um, that's a faith claim that many people will make, that this is a text that just says you're going to be thrown out with the gnashing of the teeth and so on and so forth. But as we grow, however, as we move forward in many different ways of our theologies, as we move forward, there are many claims by many people that, this is all of that stuff. How can a God be a God that would do that? And I'm of the understanding that we get called out on our things that we do by God, and what the consequences of God, because even these images of like hell and saying you go here and you go there and God pulling you out and pulling you out. When Jesus was talking about a lot of that stuff, he was using a lot of metaphoric language that we take very seriously. But it's God's decision to do with God's souls that God's created. And I don't know God's mind, but what I do is I want to lead people to do that, living well and living in your body well enough so that you are representing God and God's divinity well enough, as much as we can, and to constantly strive to do that. I think that there's something in the striving and in the confession and in the assurance of pardon that we don't automatically get forgiven, like go no more and sin, like in a confession in the priest box. But there is a way of saying, I have stated this, I've now, since I've said it out loud and I've left it at God's altar, I've got to do better. And we keep doing better. And perhaps in my own theology, I'm developing this, I don't know. Perhaps in my theology, I wouldn't want to face God without trying to do better. I think if I look back over my life and God said, I know you were human and I know you made mistakes, but you didn't try. That would separate me more from God than
God's disappointment.
Yeah.
Disappointed in.
And I'm one of those kids who was like, my mom would say, I'm so disappointed in you, and I would cry for days. So maybe I'm just like projecting that. But I also think about that in terms of even just with Adam and Eve. We like to put the emphasis on the biting of the apple, and but the whole point for me is that I can't take God's hurt and God's pain that I think about when he goes looking to hang out with his favorites in the garden and they're hiding from him. That just breaks my heart with God. And I just want to keep doing better. I don't know how my soul will be treated or what will happen. But I do know that when I face God, I want God to say, I can see every single moment where you tried to do better. And you never stopped loving and doing better. And I'm hoping that'll be enough.
I think that that notion that it's the Presbyterian notion that you can't fall away, you can't fall out of grace.
Yeah.
You're going to land in more grace. I think that gives confidence to when the love of Christ urges us on. I mean, I think that gives confidence to keep going.
Yeah.
In the love of Christ.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, beautifully put.
It's encouraging. It's, I mean, Paul's urge, but it's also encouraging.
I love that, falling from grace and you just fall into more.
Now, but in your old church, in the Baptist church,
You step away, you fall away.
You go off the edge of the earth.
You might as well sell your air conditioners and buy a lot of winter coats, and because you're going to be warm and you need to get used to it.
Yeah. Practice up.
Mhm.
But thank you, Glorine. These are such great questions that come up out of these, right? Because
Yeah.
Yeah.
Paul does that. Whew. And I'm going to hold on for the love of Christ, what I highlighted.
Mhm.
For the love of Christ. Oh, I forgot something. From now on, therefore, we regard no one from a human point of view, even though we once knew Christ from a human point of view. We know him no longer that way. So if anyone is in Christ, there is a new creation. Everything old has passed away. See? Everything has become new. This human point of view is literally according to the flesh. We regard no one according to the flesh. It can be read as an adjective, modifying no one, or adverbially modifying regard. So it's this, and so Glorine, I think without reading that part and having done that earlier, that's what I was responding to was this part.
Okay. It makes more sense in a
Yeah,
way.
everything is a new creation. Everything old has passed away, and everything has become and continues to become new.
Mm.
Maybe Paul's secretary asked him that exact question.
Yeah. Oh, I love it. I would not doubt it. Say what, Paul? Wait a minute.
Wait a minute.
Oh, I love it. Well, and finally, when we talk about faith, and we have a couple of these parables, and these parables, once again, are intratextual references that I did not put down here. Like, remember when I said with Corinthians, they had all these references to to these other books in the Bible. Well, I just did this lecture on exegesis for preaching, and I had to talk about the intertextual, like when you're talking about something and it's referring, like I preached on the stoning of Stephen. And when Stephen is talking about other things that happened in the Jewish history, he's talking about them from the Torah. So you can go back and look at them in the Torah and in the First Testament and see what he's talking about. And that means that you go back to another text outside of the text that you're in that's intertextual between the texts. And then there are some texts where Jesus and other folks are saying, well, remember what I did over there? And remember what happened in chapter 3? That happens a lot in Paul. That's intertextual. That can be intertextual. So the reason I say that, I'm bringing all that stuff up, is because in these couple of parables that we have here today, the one from the pericope from 26 through 29 is not found in any of the other Gospels. And this is the only one in Mark that is not found in any of the other Gospels. So I just thought that was an interesting little tidbit. Mark 4:26 through 34. He's been telling these parables all along. He also said, the kingdom of God is if someone would scatter seed on the ground and would sleep and rise night and day, and the seed would sprout and grow. He does not know how. The earth produces itself. First the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. But when the grain is ripe, at once he goes in with his sickle, because the harvest has come. He also said, what can we compare the kingdom of God, or what parable will we use for it? It is like a mustard seed, which when sown upon the ground is the smallest of all the seeds on the earth. Yet when it is sown, it grows up and becomes the greatest of all shrubs and puts forth large branches, so that the birds of the air can make their nests in its shade. With many such parables he spoke to them, as they were able to hear it. He did not speak to them in parables. But he explained everything in private to his disciples.
Hmm.
So only as they were able to hear it, and he did not speak to them in parables when they were not able to hear it, when he thought, oh, they're not going to get this. But these are these wonderful agrarian parables that tells us a lot about the people Jesus were talking to. These were people who were working on farms, people who were growing. They weren't, this wouldn't sell in Jesus talking to his people in Nazareth. It wouldn't matter to his dad, because dad'd be like, I don't sow seeds. I don't know what you're talking about. But many of the people would know this very much. And this is so beautiful. The earth produces itself. It produces automatically because God causes the plant to sprout. We plant, God grows. That has a lot of connotations for what we talk about in ministry. Look how many people I brought into the church. Look how many I did this. Look what I did that, blah, blah, blah. No. You just planted. And this allusion to the time of judgment, when the grain is ripe at one, he goes in with the sickle, because the harvest has come and God takes the harvest. But I love this nature, this reference to the earth produces itself. First the stalk, then the head, then the full grain in the head. I can just see a stalk of wheat right now, and the harvest has come. And if you don't get that, once again, remember, parables don't really make sense. We try to make them have logic, but when Christ is speaking these, he's getting people to think outside of the box. A mustard seed, the smallest of seeds. When we talk about the birds of the air nesting and other places in the Bible, we talk about them in the cedars of Lebanon. We talk about them in these huge trees that are homes to the birds of the air. This is a shrub. The mustard seed grows a mustard bush. And yet Jesus is saying that it is the smallest seed that can grow something enough that can fit all that God says go and be in place in that. So people would say, wait a minute, birds nesting in a shrub. Well, I've seen some of those, but you're talking about all these other. Okay, so I get it now. It doesn't have to be highfalutin. It can be just something small that produces something great that gives sustenance and life to all. That's the lesson people go home, and that's what they figure out when they go home and are talking among themselves. It's like a Zen koan, which I'm very fond of. You know, that what is the sound of one hand clapping? You know, my favorite one is a young Buddhist, a young monk came to a master and said, Master, what is enlightenment? What is enlightenment? And the master says, go to the top of that mountain. And when I meet you on the other side, I want you to tell me about the enlightenment that you found. He climbs up, sees the flowers on the bottom, climbs up, sees the grass, sees a ram up there, gets to the top. It's a beautiful vista, beautiful view. This is what he must be enlightenment. And he goes down the other side, and he sees another ram, and he sees the grass, and he sees the flowers and the rocks, and there's the old master. And the master says to him, so, what is enlightenment? And he says, a mountain is just a mountain. So all this grandeur that we place on things, it's really in all the little pieces and blah, blah, blah. Enlightenment just is. And so these parables very much remind me of these making sense to farmers. to get them to think about this. And it's something that we hold very dear, I believe, in many of our Christian circles, that having the faith of a mustard seed, knowing that that mustard seed is going to sprout and will give us something. The faith of a mustard seed is what many people hold on to in their lives.
Derek, I kind of liken it to, like, when we think of what we could offer is so small, so insignificant.
Oh, yes.
Yet when you see the outcome, it's like, just like the birds flock to the bush for protection and for nourishment, shade. You know, the ministries that come of the little that we can give, people flock to this because of their need.
You know, yesterday, a young man came into church, and he told me during the piece, he said, well, I'm going through some stuff spiritually. I need to see if it's spiritual or not. My uncle came to this church a year ago, and I talked with him this morning, and we sort of talked about what I'm going through. He said, oh, and by the way, you should go to church. Remember that one around the corner? And he came. And I talked with him afterwards, and you know, we have a lot of people on Zoom and on Facebook and this and that, but not many people in the building. And he actually said, when I came here and I didn't see a lot of people, I knew that this is the place I needed to be.
There's a message.
Did he explain that to you?
Yeah, he did. He said I didn't need all the fuss. I didn't need, and he said I'm usually an outsider, but everyone here just greeted me and treated me like I was one of the people, and always have been a part of the people here. And I'm like thinking to myself, that's St. James. But he was just sort of like, my spirit guided me here. My spirit needed just to be in a space, and I didn't see any pretension I didn't have to focus with the pretension of a crowd turning around and look at me at every opportunity. It was just the right amount.
It's a great testament.
Yeah. So I just so this mustard seed thing, you know, that's ministry that grows. There's a ministry, for example, that I'll say of St. James that is in the street, beyond our capacity, beyond what we know, and I'm starting to hear back about it. So it's very interesting, this mustard seed.
And Pastor Derek, you know, I'm reading the book, The Secret Life of Trees. And it's so interesting, the same concept of where, you know, when you think about the cedars of Lebanon and the people who used to sit under the tree in the Bible and so forth, just this whole notion of the mustard seed and thinking about all the various trees and bushes and flowers and all the things that we kind of just take for granted can be so meaningful without our even knowing it. And it's an extra bit of faith that it's all working together, you know.
And that's why so many of these agrarian things really do sort of fit with our faith language. It's powerful in that way. Anything else about this grain being ripe or this mustard seed that you will have to bring forward tonight? Well, I thank you all for such a wonderful time, and hopefully I can take your comments and get some thoughts for a sermon on Sunday.
The lectionary really nails it, how they all go together this week.
Yeah.
Like all over the place, but these you can tie them all together.
Isn't that wild?
Yeah, that is wild. Great.
Ordinary time.
Ordinary time.
And so let us get into a posture of prayer whether it is 2 feet on the ground and breathing in and breathing out, or whether it is clasping your hands together, let us be in a space of gratitude. Loving God, your word, may it plant itself deep into our hearts, and may it yield a mighty harvest of understanding. May we fall more and more into grace, and may we have the world understand that God's grace is real and it's also for you. May we be able to incorporate these texts into our spiritual lives, into who we will become as we keep trying to do better and better and better. And although, Lord, we do not have kings, we ask, oh God, that you would help us call on our leaders to be shepherds, to take care of the people, to know that that is their call, to have those who espouse themselves as Christian who are leading this country go back into their Bible and say that and understand that they are to be shepherds and caring for the flock, not separating them out, not sacrificing them. May we be bold enough, oh God, to know and to claim, like you did with Saul, you are not the one to be leading. I will decide and I will call who is to be appointed and anointed. And may we be just a part of that. May we have some of that oil and be anointed to have a little bit of goodness, to do a little bit of shepherding on our own. Hold us, keep us, love us, and thank you for allowing us to be together on this evening. And as we separate from one another, but never from your presence, we ask what we ask in the name of Jesus and claim it in the name of God and the Holy Spirit. Amen.
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 And